100 million. I mean, just take a second and let that number sink in. Out of the roughly 500 million firearms estimated to exist in the entire world today, a staggering 100 million belong to just a single family of weapons. It is an absolutely mind-boggling statistic when you really think about it.
Welcome to This Explainer. Our goal today is to unpack a truly fascinating piece of modern history. We're going to dive in and look closely at how a single piece of 1940s Soviet technology, the AK-47, became literally the most ubiquitous firearm in human history. We'll explore its origins, the absolute brilliance of its engineering, its explosive global proliferation, and ultimately how it evolved into a cultural symbol. Section 1. The Spark of Invention, from hospital bed to global blueprint.
Picture this. It's 1941, and a young tank mechanic named Mikhail Kalashnikov is stuck in a hospital bed, recuperating from a shoulder wound he caught during the Battle of Bryansk. While he's lying there, a fellow wounded soldier asks him a simple but really agonizing question about the massive disparity between Soviet and German firepower. Kalashnikov didn't set out to create some sort of global icon, He simply wanted to defend his homeland. As he famously said later on, he was a soldier and he created a machine gun for a soldier.
From that initial injury in 1941, things just moved incredibly fast. Kalashnikov started tinkering around, and by 1944, he entered his very first design competition. He and his team studied existing weapons, and they famously decided not to reinvent the wheel, but rather just combine the absolute best features that were already out there. By 1947, the famous prototypes were finished. And actually, that's exactly where the name comes from. Avtomat Kalashnikov, the automatic weapon of Kalashnikov, and 1947, the year of its first manufacture. Just 2 short years after that, in 1949, the Soviet armed forces officially accepted this design into active service.
Section 2. Engineering a legend, building for the battlefield. So what makes this thing so practically indestructible? Well, the secret to its legendary durability lies in something called a long-stroke gas system. Basically, when a cartridge is fired, rapidly expanding propellant gases are diverted into a cylinder right above the barrel. This intense buildup of gas violently shoves a large piston and bolt carrier backward, which ejects the spent casing and loads the next round. Now, why does this technical definition actually matter to us? Well, this gas system, when you combine it with the incredibly generous loose clearances between the moving parts inside the gun, is exactly why the AK-47 is so famous for its reliability. You can literally drop this weapon in the mud, you can bury it in sand, let it get totally fouled up with carbon, and those loose clearances ensure it's still going to cycle and fire the second you pull that trigger.
Now, the Soviets took that hyper-durable design and essentially found a way to scale it to the moon. See, the early AK-47 models used milled receivers. Those were heavy blocks of solid steel that had to be painstakingly machined down. It was a really costly and incredibly slow process. But in 1959, they introduced a modernized version, the AKM. By transitioning over to stamped receivers, which is essentially just folding and riveting cheap sheet metal, they achieved this massive, totally unprecedented manufacturing scale. The rifle became lighter, way less prone to metal fatigue, and critically, just astonishingly cheap to mass produce.
And there was another quiet but super vital evolution that happened right alongside it, and that's with the magazine. Over the decades, they moved from this heavy slab-sided steel in 1949 to a ribbed stamped steel and finally over to a glass-reinforced plastic in the 1990s. To put that into perspective, an average soldier can only comfortably carry about 10 kilograms of ammunition gear on them. By shaving off the weight of the magazine itself, a soldier went from carrying 330 rounds of ammunition into a battle all the way up to 390 rounds, and that's for the exact same physical carrying weight. This relentless optimization of weight and materials made the operator significantly more effective without adding a single ounce of physical burden. Section 3. The global proliferation, a weapon for every market.
Returning to that wild statistic we started with, the sheer dominance of this weapon is really hard to overstate. Out of the approximately 500 million total firearms available worldwide today, the Kalashnikov family makes up a full fifth of them. During the Cold War, Western militaries were utilizing relatively expensive, highly complex automatic rifles like the M16. But in stark contrast to that, the super low production cost and ease of manufacture of the AK allowed the Russians and Chinese to churn them out in truly vast numbers.
We can actually trace this proliferation objectively through 3 major phases. Step 1. During the height of the Cold War, the Soviet Union openly armed the militaries of its Warsaw Pact allies, freely sharing the design and the manufacturing capabilities. Step 2. As geopolitical dynamics started to shift, these really inexpensive, highly durable weapons were supplied in massive quantities to Third World revolutionaries and insurgent groups all over the globe. And finally, step 3. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the sheer volume of surplus weapons inevitably flooded straight into the illicit global black market. They crossed borders without any restriction, falling into the hands of non-state actors, cartels, and criminals. But because the design is so heavily counterfeited in these small cottage industries around the world, prices have completely crashed. The economic reality of this is almost unbelievable. In various conflict zones today, illicit black market prices can range from as low as $6 up to maybe $125. In some parts of the world, the availability is so incredibly high that an AK-47 has literally been bartered for basic agricultural goods. We're talking traded straight up for a sack of grain or a single chicken. It is just a terrifyingly accessible piece of hardware. Section 4. A cultural symbol, from metal and wood to iconography. You know, the distinct silhouette of this rifle has seeped into global consciousness in ways that, honestly, no other weapon ever has. I mean, it is literally featured right there on the national flag and emblem of Mozambique, which is a direct acknowledgement of how the country gained its independence. It was embossed on the Revolution-era coat of arms in Burkina Faso. Over in Russia, the brand is such a massive source of national pride that it's licensed out to sell vodka bottles shaped like the rifle, not to mention watches and umbrellas. In Colombia, peace activists have famously converted decommissioned AKs into functional guitars, which they call the escopetara. And in Mexican folk music, its distinctively curved magazine earned it the nickname Cuerno de Chivo, or goat's horn. That silhouette is instantly recognized absolutely everywhere on the planet. This deep global integration has resulted in a really profound geopolitical duality. We're essentially looking at two entirely different psychological reactions to the exact same object. Throughout a lot of the developing world, the AK-47 is heavily attributed with anti-colonialism, with national liberation, and it serves as a potent symbol of Third World revolution. But conversely, in the United States and Western Europe, it's intrinsically associated with Cold War enemies, and it's frequently portrayed in media as the default weapon for insurgents. It's just a stark reminder that a physical tool doesn't carry inherent morality, right? The meaning is entirely assigned by the hands that hold it and the side of the border you happen to stand on. Which brings us to one final question for us to think about today. How did a simple hybrid of stamped metal, a few springs, and some wood become the single most defining artifact of modern global conflict? It's incredibly humbling to reflect on how a simple question asked by a wounded soldier in a 1941 hospital bed rippled outward to permanently alter the course of human history. Mikhail Kalashnikov designed a gun for his fellow soldiers, but in doing so, he built an icon that took on a life completely of its own. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today, and keep asking questions.